Unless you have been living under a rock for the past couple of years, you have probably heard of creatine. Creatine is a supplement which has been around for a long time. In fact, I remember over 20 years ago, when I was competing in triathlons, taking creatine, hoping it would help me perform better. However, while creatine has been around for a long time, and while it is actually one of the most studied supplements available on the market, with over 1,000 research papers on creatine, for the most part, we have thought of creatine as a supplement mostly athletes or bodybuilders take. However, in the last couple of years, thanks to longevity scientists spreading the word of creatine's multiple benefits, reaching far beyond what we originally thought, creatine has become quite popular even among non-athletes. And for good reason. As I just mentioned, over 1,000 research papers have been written on creatine, with the majority of them showing how beneficial the supplement can be in aiding skeletal muscle development and increasing exercise performance. Some recent studies have shown that creatine may also be quite beneficial when it comes to increasing bone density and therefore helping to prevent osteoporosis. And more recent studies have also shown that creatine may help improve cognitive function, possibly even helping with Alzheimer's disease and depression. Now, for the longest time, the standard dosage recommendation for creatine was between 3 and 5 grams per day. And studies do show that to help aid in the development of skeletal muscle, as well as help increase exercise performance, 3 to 5 grams of creatine per day to be sufficient. However, these newer studies showing that creatine can help improve cognitive function, may even possibly help with Alzheimer's disease and depression, suggest that we might want to up our dosage of creatine slightly to get these potential benefits. So in the past months, I have tripled the amount of creatine I had previously taken. And in today's video, I will share with you what sort of benefits, if any, I have noticed from taking higher amounts of creatine. But before I tell you what sort of benefits, and spoiler alert, there have definitely been some benefits from increasing my creatine dosage. But before I tell you what these benefits are, let's quickly take a look at what creatine even is. Creatine is a nitrogenous organic compound that is synthesized in the body from 3 amino acids: arginine, glycine, and methionine. So creatine is naturally found in our bodies, and we can also get small amounts of it from meat and seafood. However, vegetarians or vegans like myself really don't get any creatine in their diet. And while creatine is naturally found in our bodies, as with so many things, unfortunately, as we age, creatine declines. Now, personally, I started taking creatine about a year and a half ago, after researching it for a video and being intrigued by its potential benefits. So for the past year and a half or so, I have been taking 5 grams of creatine per day with great results. I have noticed that it is easier for me to build muscle and I recover faster from my workouts. However, I have to say here really briefly that if we want to build muscle, we cannot just take creatine by itself. Creatine supplementation by itself will not build muscle. We have to combine creatine supplementation with weightlifting if we want to build muscle. But again, for the past year and a half or so, I have been taking 5 grams of creatine per day with great results. But when I came across these newer studies showing that creatine can help improve cognitive function, can possibly help improve the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease and depression, and potentially even improve sleep quality, I got curious. And as I mentioned, for the past months, I have tripled the amount of creatine I had previously taken. So for the past months, I have been taking 15 grams of creatine per day. And doing so gave me some benefits I was not expecting. But before I tell you what those benefits are, Let's very briefly take a look at some of these newer studies because I find them fascinating. So this systematic review and meta-analysis analyzing the effects of creatine supplementation on cognitive function in adults looked at 16 randomized control trials involving almost 500 participants aged 20 to 76 years. And the conclusion was that creatine monohydrate supplementation provides beneficial effects on cognitive function in adults, particularly in the domains of memory, attention time, and information processing speed. This pilot study, which mind you was pretty small, only involving 20 participants, but nonetheless, the study showed an 11% increase in cognitive function in patients with Alzheimer's disease. There are also several studies which suggest that creatine supplementation may be a promising therapeutic approach for females with depression. This double-blind randomized control trial, which actually talks about how females historically experience sleep disturbances and overall poor sleep compared to males, showed that supplementing with 5 grams of creatine significantly increased total sleep duration. And then lastly, before I bore you, because I could be quoting studies all day long, but lastly, let's take a look at this study in which a single dose of 25 to 30 grams of creatine was given to participants who were severely sleep deprived. And the creatine supplementation enhanced their brain function beyond well-rested levels, suggesting that the cognitive impairment following sleep deprivation can be offset with a high dose of creatine, which is great news if we had an occasional bad night's sleep or just didn't get enough sleep. For example, in a couple of weeks, Bean, who is laying in my lap, and myself are flying to Canada. Our flight leaves at 6 in the morning, which means we have to be at the airport at 4 in the morning, which means we have to get up at 3 in the morning. You better believe that morning I will be trying 25 to 30 grams of creatine, hoping to offset, again, the cognitive impairment, the brain fog I would be feeling all day long otherwise from sleep deprivation. I will keep you posted. But again, great news if we have an occasional bad night's sleep or just didn't get enough sleep. But we don't want to make it a habit and skip on sleep and then just take high doses of creatine every morning, hoping to offset the cognitive impairment from sleep deprivation. I don't think any studies have been done on long-term high-dose creatine supplementation for, again, cognitive impairment from sleep deprivation. But again, I find all these studies so fascinating because in the past, we have thought of creatine as a supplement mostly bodybuilders and athletes take. But now we are learning that this fairly inexpensive supplement, which has very few, if any, side effects, may have so many other potential benefits. Now, really briefly, before I finally tell you what happened when I started increasing my dosage of creatine to 15 grams per day, let's briefly take a look at why we might want to consider increasing our dosage of creatine beyond the previously suggested 3 to 5 grams per day. As numerous studies have shown, 3 to 5 grams of creatine daily is adequate for muscle saturation, meaning 3 to 5 grams of creatine per day can aid in the development of skeletal muscle. However, if we want our brain to benefit from creatine supplementation, scientists suggest that larger amounts of creatine are needed to pass the blood-brain barrier. I don't think at this point we know exactly what the right dosage of creatine is to help improve cognitive function and, again, possibly even help improve the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease and depression. But some of these newer studies explored higher dosages, such as 20 grams or even higher. And the reason why creatine may enhance brain function is that, just as it does in muscle cells, creatine helps to increase the production of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, in the brain. And it does so particularly in areas that are metabolically active or under stress. This increased ATP production can then lead to improved cognitive function, including better memory, focus, and information processing speed. Now, as I just mentioned, creatine helps with the production of adenosine triphosphate, especially in areas which are metabolically active or under stress, which is probably why creatine supplementation can help mitigate some cognitive impairments caused by sleep deprivation, because sleep deprivation is quite stressful to the brain. Another stressor to the brain is depression, which again is probably why creatine supplementation has shown to be helpful in the treatment of depression. But I would argue that nowadays, most of us, if not all of us, have some level of stress, and we might all benefit from an increased production of adenosine triphosphate in the brain. So let's talk about what happened when I personally increased my dosage of creatine to 15 grams per day. Now, I try to pay somewhat close attention to my body, and I also track my sleep as well as my stress level and so on. So what I started doing, like I said, for the past year and a half or so, I was taking 5 grams of creatine per day with great results and no side effects. I was a little worried tripling the amount because creatine can cause some stomach upset. So what I did is I took 10 grams first thing in the morning and then another 5 grams after my workout, totaling 15 grams. And doing so, I had 0 side effects. I didn't experience any dyspepsia or upset stomach, nor did I experience any extra water retention. I know the fear with creatine supplementation, especially for us females, is often water retention. Creatine can cause a bit of water retention. However, it is our muscles retaining extra water from creatine supplementation, which is not a bad thing. And of course, the thought is the higher the dosage of creatine, the more water retention. However, as I just mentioned, I didn't experience any extra water retention nor any other side effects. But the first couple of days of tripling my dosage of creatine, my sleep quality tracked by my Oura Ring improved drastically. And I thought, this is it. This is the answer. Because if you have been here for a little while, you may have heard me say that sleep has always been a bit iffy for me. I wake up quite frequently at night. And the study I shared with you earlier, showing that creatine supplementation can help improve sleep duration, was one of the reasons I wanted to try increasing my dosage of creatine. But again, the first few days after increasing my creatine dosage, I slept so much better. And again, I thought, this is it. I have found the answer. Unfortunately, about 5 or 6 days into taking the same amount of creatine, taking 15 grams per day, my sleep went back to normal. Aside from that, in the gym, when working out, when lifting weights, I feel a bit stronger and I have a bit more endurance. It is subtle, so subtle that maybe it is just a placebo effect. I'm not sure. But I do notice that I can get a few extra reps in, and I've also been able to increase my weights with certain exercises. Once more, it could be placebo effect, who knows? But me not seeing huge improvements in the gym when tripling my dosage of creatine makes sense, since, as I mentioned earlier, a dosage of 5 grams, which is what I have been taking for the past year and a half, is usually enough for muscle saturation. But the biggest improvement I have noticed, and I noticed this improvement about a week into taking 15 grams of creatine per day. The biggest improvement I have noticed is an improvement in my memory. I used to pride myself on having a razor-sharp memory. When I was in my 30s, I saw about 30 clients a week. I didn't have to write them down. I knew exactly who was coming when. I had a waiting list. I knew who was on that waiting list. I knew everybody's phone number. Like I said, I used to pride myself on having a razor-sharp memory. But for the past decade or so, I had to put notepads everywhere and write things down because my memory just isn't what it used to be. However, since increasing my creatine to 15 grams per day, my memory isn't quite as good as it was in my 30s, but it's pretty close. I haven't had the need to write anything down. My memory feels sharp. Even if I had a bad night's sleep, like last night, I didn't sleep too great, unfortunately. Like I said, that improvement only lasted for about 5 or 6 days. But even when I didn't get a good night's sleep, my memory is sharp. So that is the biggest improvement I have noticed. My brain is definitely functioning better. And that's really lovely. I'm not sure why I'm so surprised by these benefits, since some of the studies I shared with you earlier suggest that high doses of creatine supplementation can improve cognitive function. But I guess it is one thing to read about potential benefits in a study and another to actually experience them firsthand. Now, I'm not saying you should increase the amount of creatine you are taking. I would say take a look at the research and make up your own mind. And as always, talk to your doctor about it. Personally, while I am amazed at the cognitive improvement I have noticed since taking 15 grams of creatine per day, I am going to drop my creatine dosage down to 10 grams per day, slightly less. 15 grams was really an experiment for this video. So slightly less, but still double from what I used to take. And then occasionally, after a bad night's sleep or sleep deprivation, and the next morning, I might try a high dosage, 25 to 30 grams of creatine, hoping to offset the cognitive impairment from sleep deprivation. I will keep you posted on how all of that goes. Now, lastly, if after this video you are considering supplementing with creatine, first of all, again, please check with your doctor. But secondly, you want to supplement with creatine monohydrate, which is the most studied form of creatine. There are a couple reputable brands which sell creatine monohydrate. Personally, I take DoNotAge because they are third-party tested and they actually match label claim. That is something you actually have to watch out for. And I not too long ago made a video on that subject, which I will link down below. Personally, I would stay away from creatine gummies because while it is fun to take our supplements in gummy form, many of the creatine gummies available on the market, again, unfortunately, don't match label claims, meaning they only contain a fraction of what they claim on the label. So you have to take handfuls of creatine gummies to actually get a good amount of creatine. But I would love to know, do you take creatine? If so, how much? Have you looked at these new studies? And have they intrigued you to up your dosage of creatine a bit? Have you noticed any benefits from your creatine supplementation? Please share anything you want to share about creatine down below in the comments. And of course, any other questions or comments, share them down below. Always love to hear from you. Thank you so much for being here. I hope this video was helpful. Until next time, bye.